Welcome to Meet the GameChangers. I'm Rev Kev, and this is the space where we celebrate extraordinary individuals shaping our world for the better. These are the voices and stories that inspire us to dream bigger and act bolder. So let's get started with today's incredible game-changing guest.
This is Meet the GameChangers with Rev Kev, where we dive into the stories of people transforming our world one bold move at a time.
Before we dive in, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. If today's conversation resonates with you, drop a comment and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's spread these game-changing ideas far and wide. Some storms in life change us forever. We don't get to choose them, but we do get to choose how we rise from them. Today, I'm joined by Melissa Hull, a woman whose journey through unimaginable grief has become a powerful source of hope and healing for others. Melissa is an international speaker, coach, mother, and the author of Dear Drew, Creating a Life Bigger Than Grief. Melissa, welcome to Meet the GameChangers.
Oh, thank you so much for having me today, Kevin. I'm so excited to be here.
I am grateful for the journey that we've shared, and full disclosure, we know each other, and I just want to commend you on the person you've become and the messenger you've become in order to help folks live beyond what we would consider the unimaginable, that you've actually navigated that unimaginable. So grief is something we all experience at some point, but few people talk about it openly. So what do you want people to understand about loss, and maybe what started you on that journey?
Well, my relationship with grief began at a very young age. It started with my mother's terminal cancer diagnosis when I was 10. And my mom just managed her approach to death and dying in a very different way. But ultimately, what truly challenged my belief around grief is when I lost my 4-year-old son, Drew, to an accidental drowning. Gosh, it's been 25 years ago. But as anyone who trains or endeavors to engage with grief, whether we, expect it or not, that journey through that profound loss challenged me in so many different ways. And honestly, it's been a journey. It's been a journey and a process of discovery as to what my grief could come to mean, what my relationship with my son who has transitioned could remain, what that could look like, and ultimately how my life would be shaped by this experience.
How has your life been shaped by this experience? Because it's not every day that someone can come back, even 25 years later, from the loss of a parent, the loss of a child, and a devastating loss at that. What happened to you along the way inside? What changed?
Oh my gosh. So many things changed. I think it really challenged my faith. It challenged my interpersonal relationship with myself, that internal world. The circumstances surrounding my son's accident were, I was a young mom. I was 29 years old when this accident occurred. And I had two little boys, 15 months apart, Drew being the elder of the two. Drew had this zest for living. Like the little boy, he was born and then he just hit the ground running. Like he never sat still. He was up before the sun would come up. And on this particular morning, it was that very scenario. Drew woke up at about 5 a.m. His younger brother, Devin, who I had been giving asthmatic treatments to the night before, had just fallen asleep. And the last thing I wanted was for Drew to wake him up. So I took Drew into the kitchen. I got him his breakfast, and I sat him down and in front of a television with crayons and some paper. And I said, "Hey, sweetheart, I'm going to go check on Devin. I'll be right back." And when I went back to check on Devin, Devin was starting to stir awake and he was exhausted. So I laid down beside him and I began to pat his back. And then I woke up, not knowing how long I had drifted off. But I instantly knew that something was not right. I don't know. It was my intuition speaking very loudly. I needed to find Drew. And as I looked for Drew and I wasn't able to find him, that intensified that kind of that intuitive knowing that there was a problem. I just couldn't identify where he was, and I continued to look for him. And ultimately, I learned that he must have let himself outside. And as I searched for him outside, I saw his footprints leading away from the house. And I live in a part of rural Arizona, amongst a lot of farmland, and we have open water systems, for irrigation. And that's when I put the two together, and I ran so quickly to this very large canal that was just on the other side of our property. And that's where I saw his footprints leading, and there was evidence that something must have happened where he had fallen in, because I could see that there was a splash where the rest of the side of the canal was dry. And that's when it kind of came into my awareness that Drew had fallen in. So for me, the guilt and the shame that I felt around having fallen asleep, whether rightly or wrongly, I felt absolutely 100% responsible. And so when they did find Drew, was several hours later, he had fallen in the irrigation canal, and I did lose my son that day. And it put me on a path of deep despair, just what felt like a true separation from God at the time.
Mm.
I had to begin to figure out if I was loved by God, if I was worthy of, loving myself after something like this. And it was a struggle. It took me time to begin to understand that what happened that day can happen to any parent. I think I've had to endeavor to find an empathy and a kindness for myself in order to make sense of the experience, and to find my path through grief.
First of all, thanks for opening up like that. And because, when I asked the question about, well, how has this shaped you? So many have had loss similar to yours, and they have allowed it to turn them into alcoholics, drug addicts. They've allowed it to open up a path of crime. They've certainly given up on God and anything that looks like, a higher path. And so you found something
Mm.
that pulled you beyond self-destruction. You found something that helped you to get beyond self-sabotage. What was that? Because I think part of that is what is game changing.
Initially, I think I kind of languished in the despair, which makes sense. I mean, losing a child it's the most unimaginable, thinkable, unfair experience that I can think of. But what began to become evident to me is that the idea that grief had to be a life sentence, or that grief somehow was going to only allow for me to feel pain. There was something intuitive inside of me that knew that that wasn't right, that there was a disconnect between this idea that grief is love with nowhere to go.
Say that one more time. Grief is
So
what?
grief is not love's presence with nowhere to go. That's something I hear often a lot in the grief and bereavement community. It's a pretty common phrase that grief is love with nowhere to go, and that just felt wrong. It felt off. And so it gnawed at me, and I just kept leaning into this belief that no, grief is more than just this painful moment. That grief is actually this calling to remember that love is not held inside of the physical world. Love is infinite, and love is energy and vibration. And that grief is really, I've come to believe and know for myself, that grief was my spirit's calling to remember love's infinite nature.
I want everybody who is listening, watching, however you are experiencing this podcast, because I know some of us have lost loved ones. Some of us are struggling right now, like, and are on that edge of even suicide, because we
Yeah.
don't know what to do with this love that we feel we've lost. Love due to an uncoupling, such as my own experience, love due to the death of a parent. I don't know what you think that that love that love ends. So I want you to have this game-changing definition of what you can do with that love. Melissa, will you say some more? Give them that definition again.
Love is, or grief is love's love's yearning to be recognized for its infinite nature.
Mm.
Love is not bound by a physical existence. Love is something that is vibration, it is energy, it is shared in the physical form, but it existed before. It is, and it's our ability to lean into that infinite nature of love that I believe is what begins to heal the brokenhearted, to restore faith in hope in somebody who's mourning, really desperately looking for that place to offer all the love that remains. My love for Drew didn't end with his life. If anything, it intensified. And so I stopped looking at grief as this unwanted presence, and I began to ask it, tell me more, reveal more to me about what it is that you are actually here to show me. And what I discovered is that grief is by far one of the most profound and beautiful teachers if we will but sit long enough to listen to its wisdom. It is a beautiful simplifier. It creates a very clear, distinction between what is important and what is not. It allows us to understand that presence, true presence, is invaluable. Those are the things that will live beyond this lifetime and into whatever lies beyond. I believe our spirits are infinite and that we have a spiritual life before we come to this earth. We get to enjoy a spiritual and human existence while we're here. But that the relationships that we build here are not limited to just the physical, just to an earthly experience. No, love, much like God, is infinite. It is everywhere. It's omnipresent. And if we can elevate our consciousness to connect back into that awareness, our spirits guide us there, which is largely what led to me wanting to write a book for grievers to understand that I think we're getting grief wrong. I think grief is not, like I said in the beginning, it's not love's ending point. It's actually the portal, the doorway to reconnect us to our infinite and spiritual and boundless nature.
Wow. Someone is listening and watching who is going through that storm right now. And some of them are dealing with the hardest part of that pain right now. And this might be mind blowing. It might be a big ha for them, or it might be like, what is she talking about? Can you talk a little bit about or talk directly to that person who's like living in the
Yeah,
hardest part of the storm at this moment?
sure.
Give them at least 1% improvement, one thing, one step they can take to maybe be able to hear some of what you're saying.
Sure. I think the very first moment where I started to notice a difference with what the narrative I was being told grief should be or look like, and what truly began to change for me is when I realized that grief grief was a beckoning. There was something about my spirit, my intuitiveness that was telling me that grief was there to be a guide, if you will, through this experience. I know the pain gets oftentimes wrapped into the definition of grief. But if I could separate that out and focus on the love that I shared with my son, then it proved more challenging to just, you know, keep grief in this box where it's only meant for pain, because my love for Drew was still there. And the one thing, the very beginning turning point for me is when I began to have a gratitude for the pain, because for me, it was the evidence of the depth of my love. It was the evidence, the verifiable proof that this experience with my son Drew was so deeply profound, and that love was so special that not even death could limit it. So I began to have a gratitude for the pain because it was the evidence or the mirror reflection of just how truly beautiful this experience was for me. And as crazy as that might sound, it made me feel better. It made the pain feel different. It was no longer this heavy burden. It was this badge of, or this accomplishment that yes, I loved him intensely. And even though his life was brief, it was special and profound. And there was no way that him not being in physical form, that was ever going to change. So how could my relationship with him change?
Mm, mm. So what I'm hearing you say, and I'm imagining others are too, is that I have got to see that our love is always going to be much bigger than the shame, right? My love is going to be much bigger than my human frailties and inadequacies and the ways that I didn't live up. Love is the principal thing. And you're showing us that it is the doorway into
Mhm.
a whole new discovery about who we are and who we are in relationships. I think we often get it wrong, to use your terminology. I think we get it wrong when we confuse love with attachment, right?
Correct.
So when we move off of the physical earth, when we move from this form of relationship, whether that relationship be in a life death type of experience, or whether it be the changing of the form of relationship to something different, our attachment to it and the degree to which we remain attached to it limits our experience of the lessons and the gifts and all that can be contained in there. You want to say more about that?
I agree. Love is not attachment because I mean, I think it's a very simple thing. You can walk into a room and you can sense the presence of love when we're in the presence of love, we feel it. It's a vibration that we all identify with. It might be, it maybe it has nothing even to do with us. It's about another couple. But we're witnessing, and we can tie into that love experience just by by seeing it. But it's not as though it's occurring physically within ourselves. Like we're connecting to the consciousness of love. We're aligning to the vibration of love. And so in grief is largely about sorrow, right? It's about the pain. And we talk about that journey, that we take when we are experiencing profound grief. But really, what grief is, it is a calling. It is that beckoning us to, and we yearn so intensely for that connection because we've been limited to think that it can really only exist in this physical plane.
Ooh,
And so
stop,
we have to,
stop.
oh,
Gotta
yeah,
interrupt.
sure.
We yearn for that connection to continue because we only believe that it can exist. And I want to just add, in this particular form.
Yes.
It can only exist in this particular form. And I want to say, someone said that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Optional. When
Suffering is optional. What do
Right.
we say to that griever right now who is suffering because they cannot see beyond this particular form, this particular relationship, this particular way in which I have encountered and experienced that love? Come on, tell us. They need to hear from you.
Well, I believe that love, that when we are in experiencing grief, what's happening is that love is asking us and showing us that the connection has never been severed, that it is still present. It's just that we have not elevated our thought to align with its presence because the pain that we feel at the moment of separation is so profound.
Mm. So the person right now who may be in that survival mode, and in reading your book, you talk about ways in which you brought yourself through.
Mm,
And I want everybody to get the book. So let me just be clear. I don't want you to give the whole book away, but I want everybody to get the book. But you talked about, in addition to some of the things you did to change your consciousness, you got engaged physically. You did things. What are some of the things people can do to start bringing them through some of that isolation that comes when we are kind of in that self-made prison of shame,
mm.
unworthiness, guilt, or just straight up depression? You say.
I say that there is a time in a season for mourning, but it should be a season and not a life sentence. I
Mm.
think that what I have seen and experienced with people that are in acute grief is that they do need time to mourn. Mourning is different than suffering. Mourning is it's saying goodbye to certain activities, the relationships that we enjoy. And so yes, it does make sense. It does hurt. We do long for those connections.
Yeah. What did you do?
The very first thing that I did is I gave myself permission for 15 minutes a day to focus on Drew's life and his joy of living. So I began to reframe my day in 15-minute increments because that's all I could manage. And beyond those 15 minutes, if I had to bring a photograph with me of Drew climbing an olive tree in our backyard, or if I needed to bring something into that space, that 15-minute window, to help align me with seeing, like, visually seeing Drew as a joyful, happy child, something that I could, you know, connect to. That really helped me find this gratitude for the life that he lived, and not just, it shifted the focus even for 15 minutes about the life and not the loss. And
Mhm.
I needed to do that. If I just focused on the day that he passed, well, then I had limited him to one day, and he was so much more than one day. His life was filled with a lot of adventure. He broke a lot of rules. He challenged me. But when I could remember his life and him living, it lifted my spirit, and it also lifted the shame and the blame that I was limiting myself to. I had to challenge that as well. And when I could remember and see myself doing those activities, no matter how I felt about them that morning, I remembered I was a good mom and that we had a beautiful relationship. And so those 15-minute increments were really pivotal and key for me. The very first step of allowing myself not to suffer, but to align with what was appropriate at the time was to, mourn, but then also to have gratitude and appreciation for the wonderful gift that his life was in my life.
Yes. Yes. And you did that, and you did therapy, and you became an artist, and you got coaching. I mean, there are a ton of things
Oh,
that I know
yes.
personally that you did. But I want us to open this up even wider to
Sure.
those individuals who experience loss from the point of, maybe it's a career and they're grieving the loss of a career. Maybe it was a sudden firing. Like many people in this country right now are experiencing that kind of loss just suddenly, a divorce, uncoupling, a relationship that's come to an end. How can we help those individuals with these techniques that you have discovered in your own journey?
I have found so much value in partnering with coaches myself, but one of the if not everybody has resources for things like that. And another really wonderful tool that you can use is journaling. And I know that might sound very simple, but organizing your thoughts, getting clear on y- what what you want things to ultimately become in your future, but starting to have a forward vision, looking at what still remains. Look through the circumstance and into the possibilities that still remain for us. I think that we get very narrowly focused, and we let circumstances limit our ability to tap into all the possibilities that still exist around us. We just have to own our agency and understand that we play an active part in how our lives will be shaped from these experiences, whether it is the loss of a relationship or the loss of a job, or maybe it's just that life didn't turn out quite the way you thought it would be. And maybe you're even lamenting over, I just thought life would be different than this. No matter where you find yourself, you still have the agency to make change and to create the life that you ultimately want. And so I think we have to be very clear about what our choices can mean to us, and not just allow circumstances to become the ending points of where our life has taken us. Let them be just a stop off. Like you pull off the road, when you're traveling, you need to fill up your tank with gas. Let it just be this time where you're pulling over to reassess, am I headed in the right direction? And make sure you're always looking through that, windshield and not your rear view mirror, because you really can't go forward if you're continuing to look back. We have to stay open to the possibility that life is happening for us, and what unfolds is largely what we choose to choose.
Do you remember when you came out of that isolation and started to re-engage with your community and allow your life to open back up? What was that like for you, and how can we help guide people in that direction?
One of the first things that I did to kind of reconnect with my community was to talk about water safety education in my community. So I took the path of service. I wanted to educate families. I wanted to engage children in Drew's class, talk to the most at risk population, which were little boys and girls under the age of 5. So we went to preschools. And then as I began to talk about Drew and Drew's experience, and the loss of Drew, talking, to these young people about how they could be safe around water, talking to families, how they could, create more physical barriers between their children and sources of water, whether they be irrigation canals or swimming pools or decorative fountains in yards. I started to engage my community through service first, and that type of service. And then as I was sharing that information, I began to draw a certain audience, and oftentimes they were people that were, maybe they had lost a child or a spouse, and it had been 10 years, but they were coming to me with this question of, you know, how is it that I was seemingly moving through my experience and still remaining very optimistic and very upbeat and very, focused on happiness. And it wasn't just something that I was espousing, it was a presence. There was a purpose and a meaning and a fulfillment in my life that other mourners were noticing that they didn't have. And so I began to just be very curious about what those differences were. And as I began to discover that I had a different relationship with grief, because I was not limiting it to only mean that it was about pain, I started to write about it. I started to share my thoughts on social media. And then from there, I began to write, and I created, a blog that I would share. And then ultimately, I began to speak around the world. And that question kept coming back over and over and over again. How is it that I seemingly had this different type of relationship? So I began to pay a lot more attention. And so I went back through all of my journals that I had kept through this 20-year experience, and I started to organize them and speak to people one-on-one, or speak to them, one to many from a stage, speaking to hundreds and thousands of people at a time.
Yeah.
But inevitably, the conversation that really started to emerge, and what's led to writing today, and the conversations and that I want to continue to have, came from that one question: how did I heal?
If you're just joining us, we are talking with Melissa Hull, and she is a survivor and thriver of having lost her son, Drew, to an accidental drowning. She's written a book called Dear Drew, and she's helping us to understand how to live a life beyond grief and helping us to know that you can transform your pain into purpose. And that is exactly what she has done with this incredible book that she's telling us about today, but also with her life. So talk about more about to the person who's struggling right now with that pain, feeling stuck and can't do anything with it. What can they do to turn mess into a message?
You know, I think that one of the easiest elevators of our emotions is gratitude. I think
Mm,
gratitude can come in and radically improve our thought process, our internal state. If I focused again just on the day that my son passed, then I'm limiting him to this pain, just to the pain. Gratitude, gratitude can shift things in a radical way. I couldn't change the circumstances. There's no do-overs in situations like this, as much as we might want them and wish that there were. But gratitude gives us the reframe where we can see the beauty inside the experience, even though it might be painful. And it can offset the heaviness of grief just long enough for us to remember that there is something more. There is something more. And that something more is love's yearning for the continuation of that connection to remain. It's just
mm.
asking us to experience it differently. And we have to pay attention to what that looks like for each one of us.
Got to testify about the power of gratitude to help move through grief. Some of you know my favorite person in the whole round world was my grandpapa. And we were so very close, Melissa. We were besties. We traveled together. We stayed up at night sometime having what we call cornbread and conversation. He would
Mm.
keep the porch light on for me after midnight of him long day working. I'd come down the back steps and sit down and he would make cornbread. And in our family, hot water cornbread. You don't know about no hot water cornbread, but hot water cornbread. And he would make it just for me, and I would have this cornbread, and he would pour in the stories of our family and our history and all the crazy things he did to make it and to be successful and also to lead a family. And so everybody was extremely worried about me when he was declining because they knew how close I was to him. They knew how tight we were, and they also didn't think I would make it. And many days I did not know. And so I began to find a way to create some psychological distance. I actually started in my own spirit to engage with him as a spiritual presence far before he left the physical body. I started to really connect with him on the spiritual plane so that I was not dependent upon us connecting physically in person in order for me to continue to appreciate him and celebrate him. And so, little secret that has worked for me is telling his stories, talking
Mhm.
about when I talk about him on stage, I talk about my writings, and I share some of the most hilarious, and silliest things that he would say and do. And for me, it has kept him with me and very present. I feel very connected to him because I'm living inside of a space of gratitude, not just for what I had, but for what I continue to have in my spiritual connection with him right now.
I think that gratitude is it's that stopping of that maybe it's the internal narrative long enough for the spirit to be heard and acknowledged, because inside of gratitude life is a gift, and life is precious. It's impermanent. We will
Yeah.
Every single one of us will that dash between the day that we were born and the day that we leave, that dash is what our loved ones will carry on. So those moments, those experiences, I always say I want to be, a moment millionaire. I want to have so many moments with the people that I
Mm,
love that the richness of our relationship will live far beyond my physical ability, their physical ability. And so you're right. We keep our loved ones present through the stories that we share, the traditions that we choose to carry on. But at the core of it is a gratitude for the relationship and for their life.
wait,
Nothing is guaranteed.
you just dropped a gem. Moment millionaire. Okay, I want to have millions of moments of
Mhm.
richness, and love, and yumminess. I love, love, love that. May we all be moment millionaires. So let's go back because you picked up on something earlier, talked about something earlier that I think it's worth coming back to. You had it out with God.
Oh,
You
yeah.
you were up to your, you had it with God, or you thought God had it with you, and now you're on this whole spiritual page where you're clear that your spirituality is the breakthrough. So how did you get over this place where you felt that God had somehow forgotten about you, and you certainly had discarded God as a possibility for your life? Talk to me about that.
Oh, yeah, I'm very honest. I God was not for me for a time. I was very angry. I felt very unfairly picked on, if you will, like somehow
Mm.
like if there was bingo in heaven, I kept getting kind of that crappy card, you know what I mean? Like nothing ever turned out well for me. Like
Uh,
I never get
uh-huh.
that bingo moment. And I began to feel very victimized, and I let that story kind of become my whole truth. I was struggling in many areas. God was just another place where I felt that nobody really saw me, nobody really understood me, and least of all God. If and I kind of, went as far to believe, well, if God doesn't love me, then why the hell would anybody else? And why should I? I gave up on this idea that I was worthy of being loved or that there was a loving presence that looked at the creation of my life and saw anything but a disappointment. And so it was very easy to continue to tell myself that story and to limit my relationship because I had a lot of evidence. Life wasn't easy. I had had a lot come my way, a lot of struggle, a lot of things that I never asked for that I felt were unfair, a lot of experiences that had I had a choice, I would have opted out. I just felt like I was being kind of bullied by even Jesus, like it just felt bad. It didn't feel good. And so
What do you
yeah, it
say
was
to
pretty.
that? So, what do you say to that person? Because there are people right now that are having it out with God, or have had it with God or spirit or religion or anything that looks like this higher power, right?
Mhm.
And I can jump in and say something like any healthy relationship, you're going to have moments
Yeah,
where you're in deep disagreement and maybe want to break up.
I used to tell him off all the time, I'll be honest. I'd get in my car after I dropped Devin off at school, and I'd just unload on him like, "I can't believe you." Like, "What," you know,
Yeah.
"You don't seem so awesome to me." And
Mhm.
it was this kind of, fighting back, if you will.
Mhm. Mhm.
As as silly as that sounds. Yeah, I'm having it out with my savior right now. Hold on
Mm.
15 minutes. I need to unload on him for a few. I allowed myself to be honest. I allowed my true feelings to not be shameful. I was if God was real, then and if God loved me, then I just kind of would tell myself, then he gets it. He gets it. He gets why I'm pissed off right now. He understands why he's not my favorite. And
Mhm.
and he understands it. But what shifted from
Mhm.
feeling like I was victimized and really not loved was this presence of love that just I couldn't shake. I could not
Mhm.
shake this this calling, that spiritual nudge, if you will.
Mm,
And every time I tried to convince myself that God's love for me wasn't real, I would later turn around and discover that God's love for me was just incredibly patient. It was
mm,
incredibly long suffering. That even when I was fighting, against God, the love remained. And I didn't even really attribute it to God at first. It was Drew. That there was
mm,
this thing that I shared that I wanted to remain present inside of. And the more I spent inside of that belief that l- grief was not love with nowhere to go, but grief was this presence and this calling, beckoning me to continue to use it as this continuum, to use love to stretch across space and time. That's where I met God. I thought, okay, that is a beautiful gift. That is something that only a loving creator would provide. Is this
mm,
love that exists before us, through us, and after us. That
mm.
for me was where I found that starting point of the healing between myself and God and grief kind of all at once. It just started to make sense to me.
I so appreciate that. Thank you so much. If there's a thought that we can walk away with today, because we've covered so many
Mhm.
important things today. We've discovered today, first of all, that there is life beyond grief and devastating loss. We've learned that we can move from attachment to love, and that being attached to a certain way that our love looks only limits us to the pain, and that suffering is, optional. Pain is inevitable. We learned a lot of things, but the person who needs that one nugget to take away from your story today to help them to make a minimum of 1% of a game changing improvement in their lives, what do you say to them?
I say to them that no matter what our circumstances may tell us in a moment, that when we connect to our spiritual self, that is where we find the majority of the answers that we're looking for. That is the connection that we yearn for when the physical experience, like relationship or opportunities, shift and change. Grief is by far one of the most beautiful gifts and teachers if we will spend enough time listening to its wisdom and learning from it. I think that grief and love challenge us in ways that we're not necessarily always prepared for. I will say that. But love is love is infinite, and love is it it surpasses this physical plane. I think that grief is really love's calling for us to remember that it has never left. It's just our job now to understand how to connect to it in its infinite state.
Wow. I think we've got a powerful takeaway. It doesn't end with this form. It's just a journey into a whole new level of understanding our spirits and entering into a whole new level of love. Melissa, I need people to stay connected with you. How can they find out more about your work, find out more about having you impact them on their journey?
I can all of my resources and information about me can be found on my website, which is melissahull.com. So it's my name.com. So there's resources, there's information about how to contact me for speaking opportunities or coaching opportunities, so they can find everything that they would need by visiting my website.
And you want to do that in a hurry. I'm excited to have had the honor to write the forward of the book. And so
Yes.
I'm first in line with pom poms and cheering everyone on to learn how to create a life bigger than grief. Thank you, Melissa Hull, author of Dear Drew, international speaker and resilience coach. Thank you for your wisdom, your strength, and for sharing your heart with us today.
You're welcome. And thank you very much for the invitation to be here today.
The joy and the privilege was all mine. And thank you for tuning in to Meet the Game Changers. Grief, pain, and loss are part of life, but they don't have to define us. Keep believing, keep growing, and keep being the game changer you were born to be.
This is Meet the Game Changers with Rev Kev, where we dive into the stories of people transforming our world one bold move at a time.